Hello, family, and welcome. We're Bob and Penny Lord, and we have a very special miracle of the Eucharist to share with you today. But first, we want to tell you about holy clusters.
There's a concept of God the pilot flying way above the earth. From his vantage point, he can see great distances and occurrences that are about to happen and have already happened. Aboard his heavenly plane, we can see a pattern that the Lord has created. We see clusters of holy places and events that seem to have no connection with others, except that they were all instituted by the Lord. The chronological sequence may be centuries apart, but time is a limitation put on us by man, not by God.
Come with us now as we share a very special miracle of the Eucharist, a miracle of the Eucharist of Daroca, Spain in 1239. This was instrumental also in bringing about the feast of Corpus Christi.
Daroca is one of the oldest cities in Spain. It's located about 50 miles from Zaragoza. It is surrounded by mountains, walls on all sides, as well as over 100 towers. It was chosen by our Lord Jesus not to be the site of the miracle of the Eucharist, but to be the home of the miracle of the Eucharist. Against much odds and great opposition, our Lord Jesus chose this place as the house for the miracle of the Eucharist, and he would have his way.
There was a great battle being waged at the end of 1238 and the beginning of 1239 between the Spanish and the dreaded invaders, the Moors. A group of armies from the area of the Aragon had joined forces to take control of this kingdom back from their hated enemies. The Spaniards had their camp on the outskirts of a village called Lucente. They were preparing to capture the castle at Chio in Lucente. There were 6 commanders present, and their priest, Father Mateo Martinez, from the Church of St. Christopher in Daroca.
As was the custom of the time, the commanders went to confession and attended a mass performed at the camp. After the consecration, but before the commanders were able to receive our Lord Jesus in the Eucharist, word came to them that the Moors had launched a sneak attack. The commanders returned to the field immediately. The priest wrapped the consecrated host in the corporal and hid them under a rock some 10 yards away.
The Spaniards were victorious in the battle against the Moors. They took many of the enemy prisoner. When the commanders returned to the camp, they were exhilarated. They asked the priest to give them communion in thanksgiving to the Lord for the victory over the infidels. Father Mateo ran to the spot where the host had been buried. He took the corporal from under the rock and began to unfold it. He gasped at the sight before his eyes. The hosts had begun to bleed. They stuck to the corporal, making spots of blood appear on the cloth.
The commanders rejoiced at the sight. They took this as a sign from Jesus that they were to be victorious. They had the priest raise the blood-stained corporal on a standard as a banner. They marched back into the battle against the Moors, and the castle of Chio was recaptured. Credit for the triumphant battle was given to the Eucharistic miracle that the Lord had graciously bestowed on them. Now the problem began.
The 6 commanders were all from various regions of Spain. Each of them believed the sacred corporal should go to their town to be revered in their cathedral. What began as a discussion as to the disposition of the corporal became an argument. They put the question to a draw. In 3 different draws, the city of Daroca was chosen to be the home of the Eucharistic miracle.
But 2 of the commanders from Teruel and Calatayud disagreed with the procedure of the draw and its results. They seemed to be in a deadlock. The head general proposed a compromise solution. They would place the corporal on the back of a Moorish mule taken in conquest. The mule had never set foot on Christian soil prior to the Arab attack on Spain. The plan was to let the mule wander as he willed until he found a place to stop. Wherever he stopped was where the Lord wanted the corporal to remain. The plan was put into effect. The date was February 24th, 1239. The mule left the hill of Cadol and began his journey. He was followed in close attendance by priests with lit candles and soldiers. The first road the mule took was towards Valencia, but he never entered that city. He continued on, crossing a ravine that goes from Cataroja to Manizes, touching Zagorb, Jerica, and Teruel. But he didn't enter any of those cities. The mule traveled for 12 days and a distance of over 200 miles before he stopped in front of the hospital of St. Mark at the city of Daroca. At that point, he dropped to the ground in a faint.
A beautiful church was built to be the home of this special gift to the people of Daroca. There are traditions or legends attached to the donkey's trip. It is said that during the 12 days, many miraculous things happened, like angelic music and singing, fury of demons abandoning possessed souls as the mule with the Eucharistic miracle passed by, many conversions of sinners. But there's not much documentation of this. These are local stories which have developed over the years. But there is, however, verification on the Eucharistic miracle of Lucente, the pilgrimage of the mule, and the heavenly choice of Daroca as the chosen city for the corporal to be venerated. A majestic reliquary was created in 1385 and placed inside the church. There the faithful can come and venerate the miracle of the Eucharist of Daroca. Also, sculptures depicting the events leading up to the miracle, that is, the Battle of Lucente, Father Don Martinez raising the corporal as a battle banner, the trip of the mule, and the arrival in Daroca were also placed in the church.
A contingency from Daroca went to Italy in 1261, to Orvieto, where the Pope was staying. They went to inform Pope Urban IV of the Eucharistic miracle of Daroca.
Here we are in 1263, 24 years later, and God has brought about another miracle of the Eucharist. 70 years before, in around 1193, he had gone to Liège, Belgium, appeared to a little postulant, Blessed Juliana, and asked that a feast day be instituted in honor of his body and blood. No one listened to the little postulant. She died alone and in disgrace. But a priest who had believed her later became Pope, Pope Urban IV. Next, the Lord goes to Prague. Heresy is once more running rampant. The priest, along with his fellow priests, no longer believed in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. He set out for Rome to pray before the altar of St. Peter and St. Paul. On the way, he stopped in Bolsena and celebrated Mass at the altar of St. Christina. A miracle of the Eucharist came about that resulted in the institution of the feast day of Corpus Christi. When the miracle was brought to the Pope in Orvieto, where he had just happened to be staying, he declared that the miracle dispelled the heresy of Berengarianism. As the Pope was considering what the Lord might be asking of him through the miracle, it just happened that a contingency from Blessed Juliana's community came, and a contingency from Daroca telling of their miracle of the Eucharist. Which miracle was responsible for the institution of the feast day? All we know is that a feast day was instituted and is celebrated till today. Was it God weaving his design to once again save his church and strengthen his children, that truly he was with us, always has been, and always will be with us till the end of time?
Spain, there are many roads that lead to the shrine of Santiago de Compostela. The particular road we are involved with in this miracle of the Eucharist was named the French Road, or the Hard Road, because of the difficult mountain passes. When the pilgrims completed their arduous mountain journey, they stopped at the village of Sobrero for rest and recuperation. A monastery and hospice was built to accommodate the pilgrims.
In the year 1300, our Lord chose Juan Santin, a peasant from that village, to be the catalyst for this Eucharistic gift. Juan had a great devotion to the Mass and to our Lord Jesus in the Eucharist. He attended Mass as often as he could, letting nothing interfere with his going to Mass.
On the other side of the coin, there was a priest at the church in Sobrero, a chaplain, whose main job was to greet pilgrims as they finished their journey across the mountains. He was a bitter man who had lost faith in many things, himself, people, and most importantly, his vocation. He went through the motions of the priesthood, but was merely doing his thing. First, he became withdrawn from the pilgrims, then from his fellow priests, and at this point in time was withdrawing from our Lord Jesus in the Eucharist.
On the day of the miracle, the weather outside was brutal. Icy, cold winds bristled across the mountains, carrying with them gusts of snow. The streets and houses of the little village were so covered with white powder that there was no way to distinguish where one left off and the other began. There was not a footprint in the snow. It was too cold and too windy for man or beast to venture out into the weather. But off in the distance, a minuscule black dot could be distinguished in the blizzard. It was Juan Santin heading for the church.
Inside the church was the priest who had lost his faith. He was beginning the Mass. He mumbled and cursed to himself how ridiculous it was to celebrate a Mass in this ungodly weather when no one would hazard the storm. Juan approached the steps of the church as the priest began the consecration of the Mass. The doors of the church blew open. The wind pealed through the church, ricocheting off all the walls. The candles on the altar and around the church flickered. Some of the votive candles went out. The candles on the altar just managed to survive the wind.
The priest who had raised the paten with the bread and the chalice with the wine in consecration looked with anger and amazement at the intruder who had caused such a stir in the church. Is this man crazy? The priest thought to himself, how could he brave this kind of weather to come to Mass? And for what? To see a little bread and wine? Did this stupid peasant really believe that a change goes on here? Juan, for his part, entering the church and seeing his Lord held high before him in the consecrated body and blood, fell to his knees in adoration.
This is the contrast we can't help but notice. We see the simple, beautiful believer on one end of the church adoring the God being held in the hands of the disbeliever, whom God had given the power to summon him down from heaven.
This is the dramatic scene Jesus set for the execution of the miracle of the Eucharist. The host turned into flesh, and the wine turned into blood right before the eyes of the priest and this beautifully dedicated peasant. Juan was exhilarated by the gift that his faithful God had given to him.
The priest broke down into tears of joy and sorrow at the same time. He knew the gift was for him. He was joyous that Jesus loved him so much, he was willing to set aside the laws of nature to prove how important his priests were to him. The priest was also sorrowful that this was the only way that Jesus could get through to him. He had blocked himself off from all the graces the priesthood afforded him.
The village, which had previously been a stop of necessity because of the long mountain trip, now became a place of pilgrimage on its own. Pilgrimage itineraries were rerouted, sometimes taking days longer to arrive at Santiago de Compostela in order for the faithful to be able to venerate the Eucharistic miracle on the Camino in Sobrero.
Many miracles have been authenticated at this shrine. For one thing, the way the host turned flesh and wine turned blood was kept. The monks kept the flesh in the original paten and the blood in the original chalice for almost 200 years. It wasn't until the end of the 15th century when Queen Isabella of Aragon, the Catholic queen, came on pilgrimage to Sobrero. She asked to see the Eucharistic miracle. When it was shown to her, she was not happy with the way the reliquaries were being used to venerate the precious body and blood. She had 2 crystal vessels made, one for the flesh and one for the blood. They are used till this day to contain the Eucharistic miracle of Sobrero.
A local tradition has emerged over the centuries regarding a statue of Our Lady, which has been in the church since before the time of the miracle. It is said that at the instant the host turned into flesh and the wine turned into blood, the arms of the statue of Our Lady became outstretched, reaching out toward the miraculous host, honoring her Son who had caused this miracle to take place. She became known as the Virgin of the Holy Miracle and has been an integral part of the celebration of the miracle from that time on. Now, Pope Innocent III wrote a papal bull in support of the Eucharistic miracle of Sobrero, authenticating the events of that cold day in 1300.
September the 9th has been designated as the feast day of the sacred event. On special feast days, such as the Feast of Corpus Christi, the Assumption of Our Lady and the birthday of Our Lady, the flesh and blood, the original paten and chalice, the statue of Our Lady were taken out in procession through the town. Crowds of pilgrims in thousands and tens of thousands ran up the mountain to the village of Sobrero as part of the feast. The Eucharistic miracle is only exposed during the special feast mentioned.
Our Lord Jesus, when we receive him in the Eucharist, do we really know whom we are receiving? Do we consciously believe that Jesus has come down from heaven and physically enters into us through the host and the chalice? Do we believe?
Our story begins in 1572. The lives and errors of Martin Luther had spread like a cancer throughout Europe. In Switzerland, his followers were led by a man called Zwingli. Their influence spread outside the borders of Switzerland and spilled into Holland. The followers of Zwingli hated the Eucharist more than the followers of Luther and Calvin. They did whatever they could to attack the church and desecrate the Eucharist. Why did they hate him so very much if they didn't believe he existed? If they sincerely believed that the Eucharist is merely a piece of bread, then why did they go out of their way to destroy consecrated hosts?
These heretics broke into the Cathedral of Gorkham with the intention of desecrating the Blessed Sacrament. They stole into the tabernacle, opened the monstrance, and took out the consecrated hosts. It was the scourging of Jesus once more at the pillar, the crowning with thorns, the mockery he and his mother endured at Calvary. The final blow came when one of the heretics threw a consecrated host on the floor and stomped on it with his spiked boots. The spikes punctured the host in 3 places, and small drops of blood emerged from the consecrated host.
The attacker went into shock. His companions stared in amazement at what had happened. He went down on his knees to pick up the host, but was afraid to touch it. He began to sob loudly. He got up and ran for all he was worth. His friends followed suit, and in a matter of minutes the cathedral was empty and silent. Once inside the vestibule of the cathedral, the heretic could go no farther. He didn't want to be here, but try as he might, he couldn't bring himself to leave the Lord alone. He went in search of a priest. He found a dean of the church. He confessed his crime. Together they went back to the altar where the bleeding host lay on the floor. Both men realized that it would not be safe to leave the miraculous host in the church. They rode through the dark night to the convent of St. Francis in Malines.
People came to the Franciscan convent from all over the country to pray before the Blessed Sacrament in this miraculous host. Unfortunately, it became too well known. The custodians knew they had to protect it from those who would destroy it. The dean and the Franciscan took the miraculous host from Malines into Anvers, Belgium. It was thought that the host would be safe there.
The plot thickens. A German noble heard of the miracle of the Eucharist. He wanted desperately to have it in his possession. He argued that he needed something as powerful as a miracle of the Eucharist to use against the non-believers in Germany. He pressured the same man who had brought the miracle of the Eucharist to Anvers to bring the host to him in Vienna.
So the miracle of the Eucharist went once more in the same year, 1572, to another country, Austria, and another city, Vienna. From 1572 to 1579, the miraculous host remained in Vienna. Doña Margarita de Cardona had heard of the miracle and persuaded the nobleman to give it to her as a gift to the King of Spain. Instead of going to Spain, she brought it to her home in Prague, Czechoslovakia.
The miracle remained there for 13 years. At that time, like the Holy House of Loreto, the miracle of the Eucharist had to move again. Doña Margarita de Cardona sent the miraculous host to her daughter, the Marquise of Navarre, in Spain. The miracle was brought to Spain as a gift from Rudolph II, Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary, to the King of Spain. But before Doña Margarita sent it, she documented and had notarized the history of the miraculous host and its journeys. When her daughter received it, she had the Austrian envoy to Spain bring it directly to the king.
Now the king was at his royal monastery in El Escorial. It had been 10 years since he had begun construction on it in thanksgiving to Our Lady for having defeated the French at Saint-Quentin. King Philip II was a very holy man. He had his apartment right next to the chapel in the monastery of El Escorial, actually in a place which would normally have been reserved for the sacristy. In this instance, the sacristy was placed on the other side. Philip wanted to be able to attend Mass privately from his room, especially when he was ill.
When word came to the king that he was being presented with a miracle of the Eucharist, he became elated. It became his most prized treasure. He prayed often for the Lord's intervention in aiding him how to rule over his kingdom. 4.5 years after the miraculous host had been delivered to King Philip II, he died, his confessor by his side, and the miracle of the Eucharist before him in plain sight.
The Lord gave us another great believer in the power of the Eucharist and this miracle in King Charles II, the last of the Austrian kings in Spain. He prayed before the miracle many times. He wanted the people to be able to view and venerate the miracle of the Eucharist, so he ordered an exquisite monstrance to be made. He then began construction on the chapel of the sacristy in the main church.
It was a beautiful chapel in which the miracle of the Eucharist had a prominent place of honor, although it's only on display to the faithful twice a year. There's a painting in the sacristy which shows King Charles II adoring the miracle of the Eucharist. Great devotion to the miracle of the Eucharist took place under King Charles II. The 2 days devoted to public veneration of the miracle are September the 29th, Feast of St. Michael the Archangel, St. Gabriel and St. Raphael, and October the 28th, Feast of St. Jude, patron of hopeless cases. A plenary indulgence was given on those 2 days.
From the years 1936 through 1939, the period of the Spanish Civil War, the chapel of the miracle of the Eucharist was closed, and devotion of any kind was forbidden under pain of imprisonment and punishment. In 1939, after the hostilities were over, a few people, grateful to be alive, went back to El Escorial and began devotion to the miracle of the Eucharist. There had been a beautiful monstrance given to the miracle of the Eucharist by Queen Isabella II. It was stolen during the Spanish Civil War and never returned. The thief, thank God, who really had a fear of the Lord, left the miraculous host in the little chapel where they had hidden it during the skirmish. A new monstrance was built, and the miracle of the Eucharist is still on display 2 days a year, on September the 29th and October the 28th. It reposes in a small chapel in back of the sacristy. The miraculous host is incorrupt to this day, nearly 400 years later.
Why is the miracle of the Eucharist of El Escorial so important to us today? What is the great significance? We really believe that Jesus is telling us he is with us and will be with us until the end of the world, through wars and plagues, never giving up on us. By the evidence of the blood he left on the host, the 3 drops of blood, perhaps he is telling us that he is once again bleeding for us, taking the blows for us, out of love for us. We believe he is also affirming that the Trinity is present on the altar, as Jesus once again offers himself to the Father for us. He's telling us not to be afraid. He's with us. Satan can bring out all his heavy artillery over a period of what seems like forever. Yet the Lord won't be defeated. We need this miracle of the Eucharist today.
We need to know that hell will not prevail against his church. Whenever our church is in crisis, our Lord will bring about miracles of the Eucharist. Mother Mary will come to her children. God will raise up powerful men and women in the church. We love you.
Write us at the address on our screen or call us in the United States at 1-800-633-2484.
We love you.